She warned me I'd regret it. I told her, then let's make it worth regretting. And just like that, everything changed. The first time I really noticed her, she wasn't trying to catch anyone's attention, she just moved through the world with that quiet, effortless grace that made everything around her seem softer, slower, somehow more significant. I was hauling boxes into my new apartment, cursing the stubborn tape on a cardboard flap, when I heard a voice from across the hall, "You'll regret this." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. There was something lighter, teasing, in the way she said it, but still sharp enough to make me pause. I looked up and saw her standing in her doorway, a few feet away, leaning casually on the frame with one hand. She was older, beautifully, undeniably older, around 40, I guessed. Her hair caught the sunlight streaming down the hall, soft waves that framed a face both confident and quietly vulnerable. Her eyes were warm but sharp, like she could read every thought I hadn't even spoken. I felt a grin creep across my face before I could stop it. "Then," I said, letting my voice catch the teasing edge she had in hers, "let's make it worth regretting." There was a pause, and then that small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that suggests a challenge but also curiosity. She raised an eyebrow, and in that single expression, I realized she was both amused and cautious, a combination that made my stomach twist in anticipation. The hallway suddenly felt smaller. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, soft and understated, a mix of vanilla and something earthy, and it lingered in the air like a question I wanted to answer. Her presence was a kind of gravity. Even as I tried to focus on the boxes in my hands, I kept glancing toward her doorway, noticing the subtle tilt of her head, the casual way she rested her weight on one leg, the ease with which she carried herself. I wanted to say more, but the words stumbled and fell into silence. Instead, there was just that moment, the brush of her hand on the frame as she shifted, the quiet click of her shoes against the floor as she stepped back inside, and the faint echo of her warning still hanging in the hall. It was a simple interaction, but something in it had already shifted. My pulse was quickened, not by danger, not by expectation, but by the subtle, undeniable magnetism she carried effortlessly. Even now, I remember thinking that I had no idea what I was stepping into, but that I wouldn't want to step anywhere else. That tiny spark of challenge, of curiosity, had already planted itself, and I had a feeling it wasn't going to fade anytime soon. After that first charged encounter in the hallway, I found myself noticing her in ways I hadn't expected. She didn't actively seek attention, yet somehow, every casual movement of hers drew my eyes. A week after my move-in, fate, or perhaps coincidence, kept nudging us together. The first time was in the lobby, where she was juggling groceries in her arms, her posture elegant despite the weight she carried. Without thinking, I stepped forward to help, offering a basket with a small, careful smile. "Careful," she said softly, a hint of amusement in her tone, as her fingers brushed mine while taking the basket. That fleeting touch sent a warmth rushing through me, subtle but undeniable. She looked up at me then, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. It wasn't flirtation, exactly, not yet, but there was something in the way she regarded me, as if measuring the depth of curiosity she saw reflected in my own gaze. Our proximity became a rhythm. Morning coffees in the shared lounge, accidental meetings by the mailbox, or brief exchanges over package deliveries. Each interaction was punctuated by small, sensory details I couldn't ignore. The soft clink of her rings as she adjusted her bags. The faint, comforting scent of her perfume lingering in the air after she walked past. The warm, steady cadence of her voice, which seemed to wrap itself around ordinary words, making them feel layered and significant. I noticed the subtleties of her habits, how she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear with an unconscious grace, or how she would pause by the window to watch the city hum quietly below, as if the world moved differently in her presence. There was a restrained energy about her, a quiet strength that commanded attention without demanding it. At first, our interactions were simple, polite, and filled with unspoken questions. But the tension between us started to thicken. I found myself lingering in conversation, looking for the smallest sign that she might welcome a little more closeness. And she, Well, I could see her do the same, in the way her eyes lingered just a moment longer when we passed in the hallway, or how she allowed her hand to brush mine ever so briefly when handing me a package. By the end of that week, I realized the effect she had on me was more than attraction, it was a quiet, insistent pull. Being near her felt both natural and electrifying, like standing at the edge of something I couldn't yet name but desperately wanted to explore. The hallway no longer felt like a mere passage, it had become a space charged with possibility, every accidental touch and shared glance leaving a trace that neither of us could ignore. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind that makes ordinary rooms feel like private worlds. She had invited me over under the guise of sharing a cup of coffee, though I suspect she knew it was more than just caffeine we were after. The air between us had started to thrum with anticipation, an unspoken recognition that something was shifting, something neither of us could fully name. We sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, the soft amber glow of a single lamp casting gentle shadows across her features. I noticed the way the light softened her strong jawline and highlighted the subtle lines at the corners of her eyes, evidence of years lived with both laughter and quiet struggle. She poured the coffee with careful precision, her hands steady but her fingers brushing against mine as she handed me the cup. The warmth from that brief touch lingered longer than necessary, like a quiet invitation neither of us dared voice. She spoke first, her voice low, almost confiding. "Sometimes," she said, "life doesn't go the way you expect it to. And regrets, well, they have a way of following you." There was no self-pity in her tone, only honesty, a rare, fragile honesty that made the room feel even smaller, more intimate. I found myself leaning in, drawn not just by curiosity but by a desire to understand her, to meet her in that vulnerable space. "I know what you mean," I said softly. "I've had my own moments. Things I wish I could do over." My words were cautious, but the sincerity in them made her eyes soften, and for a heartbeat, the usual guardedness melted away. We talked then, slowly, deliberately, about the small regrets and silent hopes we each carried. Every laugh and pause was measured, every glance deliberate, the kind that makes your pulse quicken without a single word of romance spoken. When our hands brushed again while reaching for sugar, it was electric yet tender, her fingers lingering a moment longer than necessary, my own reluctant to pull away. Even in these quiet moments, the age difference between us was evident, not as a barrier, but as an undercurrent shaping our perspectives. She spoke with the calm assurance of experience, while I offered the restless curiosity of youth. Yet there was a balance, a rhythm, a kind of unspoken agreement that this was a space where both of us could be honest, unguarded, and yet entirely respectful. By the time I left, the air between us felt charged with possibility. Nothing had been forced. Nothing had been rushed. And yet, the quiet confession, the sharing of vulnerabilities, the lingering touches, the careful, intent glances, had built a bridge between us, subtle but undeniable, that neither of us would soon forget. The moment came unexpectedly, the kind that sneaks up and makes your heartbeat spike without warning. It was late afternoon, the sun tilting low, bathing the hallway in warm, golden light. I had offered to help her carry a heavy bag of groceries from her car to her apartment, a simple favor, I thought, but one that would change everything. She accepted with a quiet smile, her hand brushing mine briefly as we lifted the bag together. The contact was fleeting, yet in that instant, something electric passed between us. I felt the warmth of her skin against my arm, the subtle pressure of her grip, and an awareness of her body close to mine that was both thrilling and grounding. Her perfume, faint but unmistakable, mingled with the scent of fresh produce, creating an oddly intimate, unforgettable mix. We stumbled slightly over the curb, laughing at our clumsiness, and for a moment, our hands lingered together on the bag, neither of us letting go immediately. Her fingers were delicate, yet firm, and the pulse beneath her skin seemed to echo in my own chest. I caught a glimpse of her eyes as she laughed, bright, amused, yet holding something unspoken, and I realized just how aware she was of our proximity, of the tension hanging between us. As we reached her apartment door, she leaned slightly toward me, ostensibly to unlock it, but the movement brought her shoulder brushing against mine in a way that felt almost deliberate. I didn't pull away. I didn't think to. Instead, I became acutely aware of every small detail, the soft brush of her hair against my neck, the warmth of her presence, the way her lips curved in a small, almost shy smile. Even as the bag was set down and our hands separated, the memory of that contact lingered, charged, quiet, unspoken. There was something in the way she looked at me, the way her eyes held mine for a fraction longer than necessary, that made it impossible to ignore the growing tension between us. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't demanding, but it was undeniably magnetic. Later, I would replay that brief touch in my mind countless times, marveling at how something so simple, a hand on an arm, a shoulder brushing mine, could carry so much meaning. It was an innocent moment on the surface, yet underneath, it signaled the start of something neither of us could fully name yet, the slow, simmering pull of curiosity, desire, and connection. By the time I walked back to my apartment, I was acutely aware of how much I wanted to be near her again, to share another laugh, another accidental touch, another glance that lingered too long. The seed had been planted, and I had a feeling it would grow quickly, quietly, and entirely outside the bounds of expectation. The tension between us had grown almost imperceptibly, like a current running beneath a calm surface. Each meeting, each glance, each accidental brush of our hands seemed to pull us closer, yet there was a weight neither of us could ignore. For me, it was the awareness of the age difference, the quiet voice in my head that asked if I was chasing something I wasn't ready for. For her, I sensed a hesitation rooted in past experience, in memories she carried carefully, like fragile glass. One evening, we found ourselves sitting in her living room, a shared bottle of wine between us as the city lights blinked through the window. I wanted to close the distance between us, to bridge the space that seemed to stretch infinitely despite our proximity. But as I reached for her hand, it hovered in the air, unsure, before she gently pulled back. There was no anger, no rejection, just the delicate assertion of boundaries, a reminder that closeness wasn't to be rushed. The moment lingered. I watched her as she traced the rim of her wine glass with a slender finger, her eyes thoughtful, distant, yet somehow searching. Sometimes, she said quietly, we're drawn to things we know we shouldn't, and it's not always easy to figure out why. Her voice carried a mix of confession and caution, and I felt the weight of unspoken truths between us. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care about the risks, that the pull I felt was stronger than any doubt or social expectation. But the words felt inadequate, and instead I offered a small, honest smile, letting her see that my intent was sincere, patient. She returned the smile, though it was tinged with worry, and I knew that our attraction had to grow in its own time, at its own pace. Even as I left that night, the air between us was thick with what remained unsaid. Every glance back over my shoulder, every fleeting thought of her smile and the brush of her hand, reinforced the complexity of our connection. It was a slow-burn tension, unrushed, layered, filled with anticipation and longing that neither of us could fully articulate. The age gap, once only a subtle detail, now felt like a presence in the room itself, shaping the way we approached one another, influencing each word, each gesture. And yet, rather than diminishing the attraction, it heightened it. We were navigating a delicate balance of desire, restraint, and curiosity, each moment of closeness now carrying more weight than the last. By the time I reached my apartment, I was acutely aware of how much I wanted to be near her and how careful I had to be, careful to respect her boundaries, careful not to rush what was unfolding naturally, careful to honor the unspoken rules of this delicate dance we were beginning. The emotional conflict wasn't a barrier, it was the tension that made everything feel electric, and I knew it would only deepen as we continued to navigate this fragile, beautiful connection. It was one of those quiet evenings that seem ordinary until they become unforgettable. Rain tapped lightly against her window, a soft rhythm that filled the apartment with a sense of calm. I had stopped by unexpectedly, unsure if she wanted company, but when she opened the door, her hesitant smile told me more than words ever could. There was an unspoken agreement between us now, a fragile trust that allowed closeness without forcing it. We settled on her couch with steaming mugs of tea, the rich aroma curling into the air around us. I noticed the way her fingers lingered on the cup, knuckles brushing mine occasionally, each contact electric but gentle. There was a pause in her conversation as she looked out at the rain-soaked street, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "I didn't expect to feel this, unsettled," she said softly, almost as if talking to herself. I tilted my head, sensing the weight behind her words. "It's okay," I replied quietly. "You don't have to explain." I reached across, offering my hand for reassurance, and she took it. Not firmly, not for formality, but in that quiet, intimate way that made every heartbeat louder, every breath more aware. The warmth of her hand against mine, the gentle squeeze, felt like an acknowledgement of something deeper, something unspoken that existed only between us. As we talked, she shared a small piece of her past, an insecurity she rarely revealed, a moment of loss that shaped her carefully measured confidence. Her voice was steady, but there was vulnerability beneath it, and I felt a deep pull to respond in kind. I told her about a regret I had carried, a fear that sometimes made me hesitate in life. Our words wove together, a tapestry of honesty and empathy, each revelation building a bridge that neither distance nor time could sever. At one point, she leaned slightly against my shoulder, just enough to let the warmth of her body brush against mine. I didn't move, I couldn't. Her hair brushed my arm, her head resting lightly, and I felt the subtle rhythm of her breathing synchronize with my own. In that small, silent closeness, there was no rush, no expectation, only comfort, trust, and the faint pulse of desire restrained by care. The rain continued, drumming softly on the window, while the room became our own little world. In that quiet intimacy, every glance, every lingering touch, every shared smile was charged with meaning. The connection between us had deepened beyond attraction, it had become a safe space where vulnerability could exist alongside desire, where emotional intimacy naturally invited physical closeness, gentle and respectful. When I left that night, the warmth of her presence lingered, the memory of our shared vulnerability a quiet echo in my chest. Something had shifted irrevocably, we were no longer merely neighbors, nor merely curious about one another. We were entwined in a slow, deliberate dance of trust, closeness, and longing that promised something far more profound than either of us had expected. By the time the weekend arrived, our connection had settled into something delicate yet undeniable. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, intentional, and real. I found myself standing on her balcony that evening, the city stretching below us in a tapestry of lights and distant sounds, and for the first time, I allowed myself to fully take in the presence of her. She joined me silently, carrying 2 mugs of tea. I could feel the warmth of her hand as she passed me one, our fingers brushing and lingering longer than necessary. The air between us was electric in its calmness. There was no need for words, every glance, every subtle movement, every soft laugh conveyed a world of meaning. She leaned lightly against the balcony railing, and I moved closer, careful not to crowd her, yet instinctively drawn to the warmth she radiated. "Do you ever think about us?" I asked, my voice barely above the hum of the evening. She turned toward me, her eyes reflecting both city lights and something deeper, something that had been building slowly between us. A small smile curved her lips. "I think about it more than I should," she admitted, and there was a softness in her tone that made my chest tighten. Without another word, she shifted slightly, letting her shoulder brush against mine. It was subtle, almost accidental, but neither of us pulled away. Our hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always belonged together. The touch was warm, grounding, and quietly intimate. The world beyond the balcony seemed to fade, leaving only the steady rhythm of our shared presence, the gentle pulse of closeness that had been growing over weeks of laughter, vulnerability, and careful exploration. We talked in whispers, sharing thoughts, small confessions, and the quiet humor of life, leaning into each other naturally. At one point, her cheek brushed against my arm as she laughed softly at something I had said, and I felt the final threads of hesitation unravel. There was no rush for declarations, no need for grand gestures. The trust and warmth between us were already enough. As the night deepened, we sat side by side, shoulders touching, hands still entwined, gazing out at the city. I realized that the tension, the longing, the unspoken questions, they had all led us here, to this quiet affirmation. The age gap, once a shadow in the background, no longer mattered. Our connection had transcended it, grounded in mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and a slow-burning desire that was safe, tender, and entirely ours. When I finally left that night, it was with a sense of completeness. There was no dramatic proclamation, no frantic chase, just a quiet certainty that we had found something rare. Something enduring. Something worth the risk of regret. And deep down, I knew we would continue to explore it together, slowly, deliberately, and beautifully. If you felt the slow burn of this story, don't forget to like and share so more people can experience it. Subscribe and hit the bell to join me for more age gap romance stories, heartwarming encounters, and emotional journeys that stay with you long after the video ends. And tell me in the comments, which moment of this story gave you the most butterflies?